On May 8, 1965, a 26-year-old ionospheric physicist by the name of Carl Robert Dish would vanish near the bird station in Antarctica, where he was working on radio systems for the National Bureau of Standards and Technology. While it might not sound so far-fetched for someone to go missing in a place as inhospitable as Antarctica, his disappearance was as bizarre as they come. At 9:15 a.m. that morning, the Dish was supposed to be returning from the radio noise building he was working at to the propagation laboratory, the main station in the complex for his job. He regularly had to travel a very short distance between these buildings, which was just over a mile, and had done so dozens of times previously. The two structures were connected by a hand line, a rope length used to help researchers navigate from one building to the other when visibility is poor due to weather. He was very familiar with this trip as he had to make it multiple times weekly, and it should have taken him no more than 20 minutes, however. The clock hit 10 on this day, and Dish had still not reached his destination. Concerned, his colleagues decided to assemble a vehicle search party and go out looking for him along with his intended route. They found no sign of the Dish, but at around 11:30, they discovered a set of footprints over by the radio noise building. This is where his crew encountered their first mystery. Instead of leading south along the hand line, as was expected, the footprints went west towards the landing strip where supplies were flown in. It was as if something inspired Dish to change course at the last second and go in another direction. His colleagues followed these footsteps for 4 miles, at which point they abruptly stopped. The crew had to go back to camp and refuel, other than going the wrong direction. Something was interesting about the footsteps themselves. His colleagues originally speculated that he got lost and went the wrong way, as this would be your first assumption in such a case. However, judging by the spacing between his footprints, his pace was very steady, and his steps were consistent as if he had a clear direction in mind. These weren't the footsteps of someone who was disoriented. They were clearly purposeful. Dish's colleagues knew he would not have walked at a steady pace 4 miles in a straight line if he was truly lost, so they logically deduced that he must have been walking towards something. It's unclear, however, what it may have been, as nothing was being flown in that day at the landing strip, and there were no unfamiliar boot prints or tire tracks. It was very uncharacteristic of Dish to break protocol the way he did, which means whatever he saw must have intrigued him greatly. After refueling, the team headed back towards the landing strip and continued the search for another 3 hours. They didn't find any sign of Dish, and by this point the snow was beginning to cover up his tracks. At 7 p.m. that evening, another team was sent out to search the emergency extensively, James, Way, Hunt supply line, and the fuel dump area to no avail. An hour later, all able hands were gathered to form a human chain to search from the main base to the landing strip where Dish's steps had disappeared. The floodlights were also turned on all over the station, and flares were fired every 30 minutes to attract him to the area. On May 9th, yet another vehicle search party was assembled, which covered a 1-mile wide by 9-mile long area, spanning from the base to the landing strip and beyond. They managed to relocate occasional undisturbed tracks that were previously discovered. However, they too lost the trail when the steps seemed to suddenly stop 4 miles southwest of the radio noise building at 7:40 a.m. on the morning of May 10th. Now, a significant amount of time after Dish's disappearance, an 8-man search team departed the station to look for him as a last-ditch effort equipped with 2 vehicles, an emergency hut, and enough fuel as well as provisions to last a week. The search began at the main complex, moving in a southerly direction while making sweeps towards the east and west to cover the most area possible. They went on for 12 miles, marking their path with flags not to check the same area twice. Still no more tracks and no sign of Dish. On May 12th, the team searched the northeast and southeast sectors of the bird station in case something was missed. More searches were planned in the 2 days following. Despite this, Carl Robert Dish was never seen again. He was presumed dead in the following weeks. While it's not unheard of for people to go missing in areas with extreme weather conditions, many facets of this case don't make sense. The prevailing theory is that low visibility and unpredictable weather conditions disoriented Dish and caused him to veer off his intended path. This theory, however, doesn't hold up for multiple reasons. He had journeyed between the two buildings dozens of times and was intimately familiar with the compound. What could have gone differently this time for Dish to become so disoriented he would go the wrong direction despite this being a short, routine trip? Even with very low visibility, it would be impossible to miss the hand line as it was right at the bottom of the ladder that takes you into the radio noise building. Upon reaching the ground, you would immediately see it if he missed the hand line. Suppose they could clearly see Dish's prints long after he left the area. What could have stopped him from tracing them back to the radio noise building if he was disoriented, just as his crew did to many? This is a telltale sign he wasn't walking pointlessly. He had an objective. However, this begs the question: if it's true that Dish was walking towards something as his footsteps suggested, what could it have been? The anomalies surrounding the case and the lack of concrete evidence have led many to speculate that Carl Roberts' Dish was taken. While this theory may be far out there to some, many are convinced it's possible due to the abrupt cutoff of Dish's footsteps 4 miles from the radio noise building. However, skeptics argue that the rest of his prints were covered with fresh snow, so the trail ended abruptly. This wouldn't make sense given the context. How could the first 4 miles of his trail be visible even an hour and a half after he disappeared? The rest was covered completely, as if it only snowed past the 4-mile mark. This gave rise to the idea that the only possible way his prints could have stopped so quickly was if he was lifted off the ground, suggesting that after radioing his colleagues, he would be heading back to the main complex. Dish saw a craft at the landing strip and decided to investigate, which is why he decided to change course last second. Once he got close to it, he was taken, and that's why his footprints went in a straight line at a steady pace before abruptly ending. This theory might also explain what the crew experienced while looking for Dish. It's claimed by multiple sources that during the search for the Dish, as well as in the following months, there was a wave of bizarre activity around the bird station, mostly involving strange lights in the sky for which a source could not be found, and bizarre noises off in the distance, given that Antarctica is uninhabited. Bird Station was the only research center for hundreds of miles, and one has to wonder what could have produced these bizarre sightings and sounds. What's also interesting about the days following the Dish's disappearance, other than the anomalous activities surrounding the bird station, was the disappearance of his dog, Gus. The crew speculated that Gus might have caught Dish's scent and went out looking for him, only to encounter the same fate he did, whatever it may have been. Even though the abduction theory could explain the anomalies surrounding this case, many just can't subscribe to such an outlandish idea, and instead propose more rational explanations, albeit none of them hold much weight once you look into the facts. One theory is that Dish may have suffered a mental breakdown, as it's rumored that he had been cheated during a card game just moments before leaving the building. Already suffering from the isolated conditions, many believe this could have been the last straw. Living the thought of him doing something so drastic over something so simple, such as a card game, doesn't make sense for someone of his caliber. It also doesn't explain the abrupt ending of his footprints, or where he could have ended up with no one finding him. An alternate theory states that the Dish could potentially have been extracted from Bird Station by the Soviet government using a helicopter, as he may have been an undercover operative for them after all. This was during the height of the Cold War, and a man with the Dish's skill set would have proven extremely beneficial to the Soviet Union, especially in the position he was in collecting data for a major American institution at the time. There were many stories of scientists going missing under suspicious circumstances, and there was speculation that these were Soviet agents who were extracted after completing their mission. Some believe Dish could have been one of these scientists who were working undercover for the Soviets. This theory could also explain what he was walking towards and why his footsteps abruptly stopped, as the gust of air from the helicopter propellers could have moved the snow around and covered up the prints. But this theory, too, isn't without its faults. Bird Station is over 400 miles away from the nearest coastline and even farther from the nearest complex. Therefore, it would simply be impossible for such a distance to be covered by air, unless the Soviets had a secret base installed nearby that we are unaware of to this day. It's also unlikely a helicopter could have gotten so close to the base without at least someone noticing. However, we are no closer to solving the case of Carl Roberts' dish than we were on May 8, 1965. However, at first, it did seem like an open and shut case of a man who got disorientated during bad weather and succumbed to the elements. Once you explore the facts, you quickly realize something unusual happened here. Although we may never know what it is, this case is a stark reminder that sometimes the simple explanation doesn't work.